Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to take a closer look at instructional design.
Yeah, and through a really practical kind of real-world example.
Exactly. We've got this video from Brooks Charter School. It's called Crafting Problems. And also some really, I think, fascinating material from Dustin Madison. He observed this lesson using his own model, pedagogical identity in motion, and something he calls fractal gridding.
Yeah, that fractal gridding is, it's quite a technique.
So our mission today really is to pull out those key insights, about designing learning that's responsive, that's student-centered.
Which is super relevant, I think, for teachers who are moving into those leadership roles, particularly around instructional design.
Definitely. So let's talk about Madison's observation. It wasn't just about the math lesson itself, was it?
No, not at all. He was looking at teaching as a whole, like a responsive system. That's the key phrase he uses.
A responsive system.
And he used his pedagogical identity in motion model, which, uses systems thinking to frame it.
And the fractal gridding. How did that actually work?
Okay, so picture this. There's a sun right in the center. And that represents the core question. Why story?
The why, before anything else.
Exactly. It forces you to grapple with the purpose first. Then, around this sun, you have these planets.
Okay.
And they're used to jot down ideas, observations, with headings like WHO, how, what, and revise plus grow.
Oh, how, what, revise plus grow. It sounds really structured.
It is, but it's also an exercise in metacognition for the observer. Madison was using it to see his own thinking, to articulate those sort of intangibles of teaching.
Makes sense. And this idea of pedagogical identity in motion, what does that really mean in practice?
Well, it emphasizes that our teaching identity isn't some fixed thing. It's adaptive. It's relational.
Relational, meaning with the students.
Deeply student-centered, yeah. Which lines up perfectly with what you see from the Brooks teachers in their materials. Their whole mission seems to be that struggle is the fun of math.
I like that phrase, struggle is the fun.
Right, and it's rooted in these core values. Joy, rigor, and, importantly, equity.
Okay, so let's connect this back to the fractal grid and what Madison observed in the video, thinking about teacher leadership. Where do we start?
Well, let's look at the planets. Top right was learner context and entry points.
Okay.
And what stood out is that these teachers, they really start with the students, not just the math task.
How do they do that?
They use qualitative observations, just watching and listening, but also quantitative assessments. They're trying to understand what kids already know, sure, but also how they reason, the strategies they try.
So it's about understanding the individual student.
Exactly. Designing for student identity and variability. It's a deliberate move away from that, one-size-fits-all pacing that often leaves kids behind or bored.
That's a huge shift and definitely something teacher leaders need to champion.
Yeah.
What about the actual lesson design? Top left planet was...
Yeah, instructional design and routines. And the materials show their lessons often start with these rich, tricky problems.
Tricky problems.
Yeah.
Meaning hard.
Tricky in a good way. Problems that have multiple entry points, different ways to get started. And they invite multiple strategies. It's not just about following one procedure.
Okay. Provoking reasoning.
Precisely. The routines are built to provoke reasoning, not just procedures. The grid image itself mentions signature routines, this idea of plurality of strategies, building concepts. It really shows how their values, their why, become visible in the actual design.
So the design reflects the philosophy.
Absolutely.
What about student work? How does that fit in? I think that was top middle.
Yeah, student work. And the perspective here is really key for leaders, too. It's seen as a window into thinking.
Not just a product to be graded.
Exactly. Even a quote-unquote wrong answer is valuable if the student's logic makes sense. It becomes a point for discussion.
That sounds like asset-based assessment, focusing on what the student can do, how they're thinking.
Right. The image notes talk about applying problem-solving skills and letting students discover problem-solving strategies on their own. It's about how they organize ideas.
So, as a leader, how do you encourage teachers to see student work that way?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And it connects to the last quadrant, bottom left, the feedback and reflection loop.
Okay.
The materials show these teachers reflect weekly. They look at the student work and use that information to revise the problems for next time.
So they're Iterating, constantly tweaking.
Yeah, it's like agile thinking in the classroom.
Yeah.
The student work feeds directly back into the instructional system. The grid image mentions collaborative reflection, using feedback for next steps, continuous refinement.
It really paints a picture of a dynamic process.
It does. The whole thing, the video, the observation, it shows a kind of logic model in action. These aren't just teachers delivering lessons, they're designers, constantly cycling through design, reflection, growth, all based on student responses.
So, the big takeaway then, especially for those of us developing our leadership in instructional design, what is it?
I think it's that effective design, the kind that leads to real learning, isn't a one-off task. It's this continuous cycle.
Understanding learners.
Deeply.
Yeah.
Then designing engaging tasks.
Analyzing the thinking.
Right, really digging into how kids are making sense of it.
And then adapting. Being willing to change based on that feedback.
Exactly. And that idea, struggle is the fun. It applies to us as educators too, right? Refining our practice is the challenging but rewarding part.
That's a great point. It reframes the difficulty of improving our teaching. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, especially those stepping into leadership. How could you start applying these ideas, thinking about your own pedagogical identity in motion, this responsive design?
Yeah, how can you view those instructional challenges you face not as like fixed obstacles,
But as opportunities.
opportunities to grow, definitely. And maybe even more importantly, opportunities to understand your students on a much deeper level.